Hello, good people. Welcome to Hillbilly Cat History. Signed, sealed, remembered, Australian Dreams on the Circle G. Hi, Keith. Hi, Gunn. Thank you so much for joining me. I appreciate seeing you here. And if you were here yesterday, or you saw the last episode, you know that we left off on a great story about Elvis renting a movie theater for one of his famous midnight showings and meeting Eric Clapton there at the theater, watching movies with Eric. Hi, Marion. Thank you so much for coming. Appreciate seeing you here. And one of the fans, they asked Gary Pepper, who is a friend of Elvis's, who lives next door to Elvis's father, Vernon Presley. And Gary, he writes articles and he sends them to fanzines for Elvis all over the world. And in many cases, he's a direct conduit, straight from Elvis to the fans, unfiltered. It's not run through the kernel, it's not run through the machine. Entrusted to Gary, and he puts the word out. But Gary also answers questions just based on his own observations, just from being there. Hi, Emma. Thank you so much for coming. Appreciate seeing you here. Hi, chillin' in Canada. Thank you so much for coming. I appreciate seeing you here too. Well, one of the fans asked Gary Pepper, he says, is it true that Elvis drinks a lot of water? And Gary Pepper says, you'd better believe it. At the midnight movies, Chief Ray Sitton has a tall paper cup of water waiting for him when he arrives at the theater. And he usually gets a refill several times during the movies, which usually last 3 hours or more. Gary tells us Elvis likes to drink water, drinks a lot of water, and that one of the guys, one of the Memphis Mafia, the man he calls Chief, his real name is Ray Sitton, Sitton. Well, that man's in charge of having a tall paper cup of water ready all the time, at least while he's at the movie theater. And that these movie theater settings usually last 3 hours or more. So Elvis watches at least 2 movies in most cases, if not 3. And the way Gary's saying this, it's fairly clear that Gary has been to some of these midnight movies. Now, some of you may remember Chief, who's a little known Memphis Mafia character, but you may remember him from an earlier story, from around this time of year, just a little bit backwards at Christmas, when Elvis bought a tractor at a Sears, a little lawn tractor, a lawnmower that you could ride on, and it had a little wagon that came behind it. It could pull. And Elvis pulled some of the Memphis Mafia wives, including Priscilla and Chief Ray Sitton around, and he ended up dumping over the wagon, and Chief, who was a very large man, fell on top of these ladies. And it's a hilarious story, and I tell it much better in a previous episode. So if you're new here, be sure to check out the back archive, because I got a whole lot of good stories back there. And while we're back here, a little further back in the archive than where we were, because I think that last story about the midnight movies, I'm fairly certain that occurs in March, late March, after Elvis has traveled to Hollywood and he's come back to recuperate and get ready again for clam bake because there are delays in shooting. I believe that's when that story happens, because there's a mention that it's winter, but Joe Esposito is there. And I don't think Elvis was going to the movies in the first month that he bought the ranch. I think he was just too invested in the ranch at that point. But we can't be certain. But we want to finish out this month of February, so I'm going to back up until late January to talk about a couple of things that I haven't told you yet. And Chilling saying that Elvis loved that Mountain Valley spring water. He did, but I think this is before Mountain Valley spring water. I don't think he's discovered that yet. I think that's a 1970s kind of thing. And here I think he's just drinking tap water. Can't be positive. But otherwise I don't think it'd be in a tall paper cup. But it would be interesting to see if we could find the very first reference to the Mountain Valley spring water and see how backdated that is. But let's look at January 23rd, 1967. Now we know that on January 2nd, Elvis received a letter from the Colonel. But we couldn't see it because it was referenced in another document. You know, a book. And this is the series, Signed, Sealed, Remembered. We're trying to look at documents, source material, the document itself of Elvis, how he's reflected in the paperwork that swirls around him. Sometimes we don't have the paperwork, we've just got to go with the references that we have, and that's what we're doing here. But we know that he got this letter from Colonel Parker, and it basically reiterated the new deal that went into effect on January 1st that gave Parker a 50% interest in some future earnings that Elvis would have. But that's for future earnings, and it specifically was not the recording contracts, nothing to do with the music itself. And nothing to do with the movies themselves as already contracted. So whatever he was already contracting for Elvis, he would continue to take 25% on, even in new deals. The Colonel, that is. But the Colonel would take 50% of ancillary deals that he made based on these products, in which Elvis did not have to have an actual physical or time participation. But we don't know how Elvis felt about those contracts, or this new change to the 50%. We kind of theorized he might be chafing under it. And Keith's asking, when did Priscilla and her parents and sister move into the Circle G Ranch? I don't know, Keith. I haven't actually heard that her parents and sister were there. I know that Priscilla was there as of May 5th or 6th. And Priscilla was there before. I mean, she was there the first night. I haven't really heard about the parents and sister, so I'm going to have to look more into that. But I did see your question earlier. And it is interesting to see that. I don't know, is that something she said in a recent interview or something? And Keith's asking, did the Colonel bamboozle Elvis Presley? Well, he didn't change the current structure of their deals. What he was telling Elvis was, I'm going to go get all these other deals, and you're going to take half of them, and I'm going to take half of them. But Elvis had always made 75%, so I think he could still be a chafing kind of thing. He could still be irritated by this. But on the 23rd, so that was the first and the second, here we are 20 days later, There have been events that transpired professionally for Elvis within these 20 days. And on the 23rd, Elvis sends a telegram to Norman Rakusin and another telegram to Harry Jenkins, who both work for RCA. They're RCA executives. And these telegrams are of his approval and thanks for the new RCA deal, which now extends through 1980. So this is 1967. The Colonel has just brokered a 13-plus year contract with RCA. Nearly a decade and a half of guaranteed money for Elvis. And we saw in yesterday's episode that Elvis was going to make $300,000 in guaranteed upfront payments every year from RCA. And that's for this contract for these next 13 years. They're going to pay him $300,000 and then settle up at the end of the year, because they're probably going to owe him more. But it's going to be close to that $300,000. That's what they're all betting, at least for the next few years. And chilling in Canada is saying that AI says Priscilla Presley's parents, Anna and Paul, moved into a trailer home on the Circle G Ranch in March of '67, shortly after Elvis purchased the property. Huh. That certainly makes it seem more like there was 12 there then. I'll have to find the references that the AI is going at. And Gunn's asking if knows for how long they lived there, just visiting or moving in. I'm going to assume that they went back to California with Elvis in early, not with Elvis, but around the time Elvis did in early March, because that's where Priscilla would have been at that time. So I doubt they would have wanted to stay on the ranch. Just me guessing here. And then I'm thinking they might have stayed until after the wedding, and then maybe had come back after the wedding. But AI is saying until he sold the property but it's saying in 73. Well, that can't be quite right. So AI is a little messed up on at least some of that. But that's some interesting information. But I'm still wondering, Keith, did you hear that recently from Priscilla, or did you see it in a specific book or something? Because I'll definitely go to the source and get it from there, if I can identify it. But back to this story, in January 1967, Elvis has sent telegrams to these two RCA executives, and he's saying, hey, I love this thing for the next 13 years of getting $300,000 up front. I'm loving it. And of course, he has recording obligations that come with the contract. But he's telling them, I'm good with those obligations. I'm going to keep up on them. And then 2 days later, on January 25th, Colonel Parker sends Elvis a deal memo. So now this is our fourth document now, actually our fifth. So the first document was, there was a contract change on January 1st. There's a second document of a letter that goes from Colonel to Elvis, reiterating what's in that document and just reminding him it started and thanks for it. And there's a third reference document that's actually this new 13-year plus contract with RCA. And there is a fourth and a fifth document, which are both telegrams, one to Norman, one to Harry. And now we're on a sixth document, which is the deal memo that Colonel Parker sends to Elvis for a new Allied artist film to be made in 1968. And for this new unnamed film, Elvis is guaranteed a salary of $900,000. So up front, he's going to collect $900,000. This is before any kind of profits come in, before he's not sharing or counting on points in any way. He's going to receive $900,000 in cash prior to getting this movie completely made, or at least by the end of its making. Before it's out, Elvis has $900,000 in his pocket. Now that's split. Part of it goes to the colonel, part of it goes to taxes. He has to pay people out of it. Obviously, he doesn't get to keep the whole thing, but he's getting $900,000. So when we compare that to the what we might think of as the bread and butter contract of RCA, the music, the reason that we kind of all believe he's there, to sing the songs, he's now making in one movie, and he's making 3 of these movies a year, he's making 3 times the amount that he makes, that he's guaranteed annually from RCA. Now he's going to get a little bit more, because he's going to outperform whatever those numbers are that they're basing the 300,000 on. But he's not going to make another 300,000 from RCA. He's not going to double the money. So he's actually making a lot more money at the movies. When we talk about revenue streams, it's important to remember all the different revenue streams that he has and which ones are bringing in the most, because most people are going to spend the most time and the most effort on the revenue streams that are bringing in the most money. Now, while he's on this ranch, this is part of what Elvis is thinking about. He's wanting to reorient his life. But the big money is in the movies. He's wanting to get back to this recording thing and the live performances that go with it. But can you make enough money from live performances paired with the recording to make up for the potentially almost $303 million that you're going to get paid per year if you continue to do the movies? Assuming that the colonel can do his part and continue to make those deals. And Gunn's saying almost $1 million for each movie. Right. And this is the guaranteed salary. So there is more that Elvis gets out of this, and the colonel is a mastermind at getting money that doesn't count towards this number. So, like, there's a bunch of expenses that are paid for Elvis. Well, if you pay $50,000 in expenses for Elvis, that's $50,000 that Elvis doesn't pay, that he would have to pay during this period. That could take care of some of his salary expenses and stuff for his staff. That kind of means he made $950,000. But he doesn't pay any tax on that expense money. There's other things that are provided, like cars and drivers and offices and trailers and, all kinds of things that fall underneath these deals that don't count towards this 900,000. So yes, Elvis is pulling in at this point more than $1 million per movie, but this is the height of his movie career. Could have gone higher, but this is while he's on the ranch. He's thinking, I don't really want to do this anymore. This is when he begins to make his changes. Now, does he come out of the ranch thinking, I'm heading back to live performances and I'm going to... No, that comes with the 68 special. But he's primed in his mind to be able to take advantage of this opportunity that the 68 special provides. Because as he moved into the 68 special, nobody knew what it was going to be. He crafted that. He made that into what it was. Now, he had help, and others want to take a lot of credit for what was there, Steve Bender. But Elvis created that special. It's kind of like he found a new tool at that point in time to get his entertainment and messages across, and he didn't really know how to use it. And that's what that 68 special is. It's him experimenting with this this new format that he has. And he somewhat uses that in later movies that are specifically about his touring. And I think if those movies had gone on and he had lived, those could have, I mean, they were already fantastic and provided the films that we're going to see now as the epic film that's coming out. But I think they could have been even greater if he'd had more personal involvement in what the movies look like, which I think he might have, because he was getting into being a director and to being a producer, and he was trying to make this movie about karate. And he eventually, that fell apart, but he was moving in that direction, right? The interest was there. But back to January 25th, 1967, Colonel set up a new deal, and Elvis is pretty happy with it. So is Elvis really unhappy about this January 2nd thing, and is he still bothered with it by the end of January? Well, maybe not, because Elvis thanks the Colonel and refers to him as the #1 potentate of all time. Now, ultimately, this deal does not go through. But Elvis thought it was going through at the end of January, so I'm thinking he was kind of happy about that. But then that sets it up that later on, maybe a month or two later, when he finds out this doesn't go through, may not have been as happy about it. May have had a few hard feelings towards the Colonel. Maybe this is why the Colonel sent him all those Shetland ponies and didn't put up a huge ruckus when he didn't show up at Clambake right away. Took that letter from Dr. Nick and got him that extra time. Because that's what we look at next is Elvis on the 21st, on the 22nd, and the 23rd of February. He records. There are Clambake sessions for recording the songs for Clambake. Elvis attends the first one and the third one. Red records vocals as a guiding track during the second one. And then a few days later, Elvis calls in Dr. Nick because he's got the saddle sores. And just to bring our minds back to that, Sonny West says, Elvis's personal physician was Dr. George Nikopoulos, a Memphis-based son of Greek immigrants. He was introduced to Elvis through George Klein's then-girlfriend, Barbara Little, who worked as his secretary. Dr. Nick, as we referred to him, came out to the ranch one Sunday in February 1967 to treat Elvis for, of all things, saddle sores. Elvis called him back out 2 more times that same day and the day after. And we've seen that story in much more detail, and we've heard it directly from Dr. Nick. So it's back there in the archive in the past episodes. So if you missed that, be sure to take a look at it. And if you're learning anything new today or in any other episodes, go ahead and hit that like button. Make sure you're subscribed. Make sure you got your notification bell clicked on so that YouTube might tell you the next time I'm on live. But it's going to be 3 p.m. tomorrow, Eastern Standard Time. Now, when is 3 p.m.? It's 24 hours from now. If you're listening right now live, you're going to be back here at the same time. 3 p.m. Eastern Standard Time every day right now. And we're going to be on the Circle G for a while longer. And be sure to comment if you're watching on the replay, and chat if you're watching live, because I'd love to know that you guys are learning new stuff and that you're enjoying the episodes and that we're all learning together. But Dr. Nick, he writes a letter. It says that Elvis can't make it, can't travel, too painful, saddle sores during this period. Gives it to Colonel Parker, who's able to use that to smooth things through with the studio people. But a couple of days later, February 28th, Colonel Parker sends a letter to Marty Lacker regarding Elvis's and Marty Lacker's consumption of pharmaceuticals, and he effectively relieves Marty of co-foreman duties. So if you were with me for previous episodes, you may remember that Elvis bought a whole lot of trucks, and that Marty sat at a dining room table. We're not sure where, but we think it might be Graceland. And he filled out registration forms by hand, because that's how you did it in 1967, for all these trucks that Elvis had bought, which could be as many as 33. And while he was filling out these forms, he was hoping that he matched the right form to the right truck to the right owner. Now, why was he hoping that? Why did he write in 1978, 11 years after this, sure hope I matched up those trucks right? Well, it's because I don't think he did. I think that he did not. I think that was him telling us that he had mismatched some of those trucks. And who would know this? Well, we saw Becky Yancey, who works in the office with Vernon, who does a lot of paperwork filing, filling out forms herself, say that ultimately they were in charge of making sure that all the cars had insurance. All the vehicles were insured. So they had all those forms, or copies of them, and they bought insurance based on them. And then Vernon's trying to figure out which trucks do they still own, because he doesn't want to pay insurance on the trucks that they don't own, that Elvis is given to contractors or to whoever, or even that he's given to staff. Vernon at least needs to insure with Elvis if he should continue to pay, if he gave 2 trucks to Alan, should Alan pay for both of those trucks' insurance, or is Elvis going to pick one of them up? But Vernon's not even sure. All he knows is he's paying all the insurance right now. So he starts going through the paperwork. And we saw that from one of Becky's statements. And here's all this messed up paperwork. And I'm assuming it's messed up because Becky and Vernon had a hard time matching it all up. Well, who messed it up? Could it be the guy at the dining room table that Vernon keeps walking by inside of Graceland? Every time Vernon goes to say hi to his mom, and here's Moon Lacker over here hunched over the table, filling out all these forms, but ultimately some of them are incorrect. And we've heard in previous episodes how Marty has referenced Vernon, and that there was some kind of issue between them, probably more on Marty's side, some kind of resentment, and that resentment has grown through the years of the telling of the stories. So that when Marty tells a story in 1978, he's much kinder to Vernon than he is in later years, but the irritation is still there. It still shows through. The frustration. So there's something between Vernon and Marty, and I'm not sure whether Vernon was aware that Marty didn't like him as much, but Marty also felt that Vernon didn't like him, and that comes out in his book as well. We haven't really talked about those pieces, but there are other issues that Vernon and Marty have that Marty reports about. But now Marty's gotten a letter from Colonel Parker. Well, how did Colonel Parker find out anything about Marty on pharmaceuticals? Colonel's not even there. Well, it could be because, as we've seen Becky Yancey describe, Colonel and Vernon talk on the phone. And my guess is they talk daily. Elvis is a big operation. Millions of dollars are passing back and forth between people. There is a lot of paperwork to be done, even when you don't consider 33 trucks being given away. Trailers bought on top of that. $500,000 land purchases. So I'm pretty sure that anytime Vernon got a little worried, he called the colonel. And you can be very assured that in the early days of the colonel, when they had first gotten together, that Vernon called about every single invoice that he received. Every single report with a check attached to it saying this is your portion. I guarantee Vernon called the colonel and said, walk me through this. I don't understand the math on it. And would have forced the colonel to show that he was treating Elvis fairly and squarely. And the colonel had no problem with that, because if you look at the colonel's reckoning sheets, they're very easy to follow. Like you have no problem with it. So whatever issues that Vernon had, the colonel was open to him. So if Vernon got it in his mind, and Vernon would have known about this pharmaceutical use, if Vernon got it in his mind that Marty was not in shape to be handling this kind of paperwork, he could have easily said so. So everything that I've just said for the past 5 minutes or so is all speculation on my part, other than the statements that they made and that you can reference in past episodes. So if you see it differently, or you've got a different opinion, or you've got different source material, or you just think I'm just totally wrong, feel free to put that in the comments, put that in the chat. If you think I'm right, put that in the chat too. But let me know, because we're here trying to discover this and learn about it together. And we're going to take a short break to jump back to Christmas 1966. That kind of started this all out. And we're going to listen to a song that focuses on two people that were in this whole adventure, but they did not receive horses. Neither one of them got a horse. But Elvis did buy them both a vehicle, a nice car. Both of them got a convertible. One is George Klein, and one is his friend Gary Pepper, Elvis's friend Gary Pepper. And they were both very loyal friends to Elvis. Gary couldn't ride a horse. George didn't really want to. Elvis knew what was in their hearts. And he wanted them to keep up with him while he was speeding away on these horses. So he bought them gifts of motion. And I call this song Trust in Motion.
Radio static, Memphis bound, WABQ homes a sacred sound. Green, green grass, again and again. The DJ's risk for a loyal friend. Elvis smiles, no words exchanged, just a test of love on a range. Keys in the dark, showroom and blow. A Cadillac waits in a silent show. Merry Christmas, GK said. A yellow chariot, tears on shade. What's fame and fortune worth, my friend, if it's not something we can lend? The Chevy Impala, still shining new. Passed from blind to the Circle G crew. Gary Pepper wheels instead of brakes. Rode the road with Elvis in his face. Sterling drove it, errands and guard. A father's devotion, quiet and hard. He couldn't walk, but he moved the crowd. Fancy twisted, but faintness allowed. No pedals filter, no machine spin. Just Gary's true
Thank you all for gathering here at Hillbilly Cat History, where we remember together and listen for the echoes. And today, we're going to talk about Australian dreams on the Circle G. Hello, Angie. Hello, Anna. Thank you guys so much for coming. Appreciate seeing you here. And today we're going to look at a special magazine, an article from a magazine that came all the way from Australia. Now, in yesterday's episode, we ended off with a story about the midnight movies. And Elvis drove a car that was very similar to this one on screen, the El Camino, which is a half car, half pickup truck. The one he would have drove would probably look very similar to this. Hi, Linda. Thank you so much for coming. Appreciate seeing you here. And here's the movie news. You can see a beautiful picture of Elvis in a gray suit, a black tie, and a black handkerchief sticking out of his suit pocket, a white collared shirt. This is a magazine from Australia, which has a date of March 1967. Which means it probably arrived on the newsstand second or third week of February and would have stayed on the newsstand until the end of March. And then the news guy would have known, because it said March, to pull it off in April. Sometimes they could send some unsold copies back and get their money back. And sometimes the news guys were stuck with them and they just had to figure out what they were going to do with these old magazines. And there's an article in this magazine, Why Elvis Can't Come to Australia. And there was a fan demand for Elvis to go to Australia. Australian fans had been clamoring for Elvis to visit their country since his rise to fame in the 1950s. And by 1967, the demand had reached a fever pitch, with fan clubs and promoters making substantial offers for a tour. These people were getting a hold of Colonel Parker, and they were offering him money. And it wasn't just a little bit of money. They were offering a lot of money to come to Australia. But why Elvis can't come to Australia? And this story was filed by Hollywood correspondent Derek Hunter. So even though the story comes out in a March magazine, which we know would have been printed, shipped around the beginning of February, which means it would have had to have been ready for the printer by the end of January. So everything in it is previous to that. But because of a couple of references within this article, my belief is this interview took place while Elvis was in Hollywood in November, possibly in October of 1966. So it's an October or a November 1966 interview. Nobody's seen it in the public until March of 1967. But I think we can kind of rely on this as Elvis's views during this period. At least as his official views. Elvis is going to talk directly in this article, and so is Colonel Parker. So we know that this is an official, through the Elvis machine, publicity piece. You know, Colonel's involved in it. Everything's been okayed. Elvis is probably not going to say anything super surprising or anything that he hasn't probably okayed with the colonel in advance. Now, Elvis always could throw out a bombshell, but I think in most cases with these large national, international press pieces, he follows the colonel's advice. Now, sometimes he tells Gary Pepper things to get out into the fanzines, but even those are measured and they're thought out. They're sometimes just more direct to the heart than what he gets into these magazines. But let's take a look at this article. So here's what the article says. Elvis Presley would really like to visit Australia, but there is no chance of him being able to do so in the foreseeable future anyway. That's what Elvis and his legendary manager, Colonel Tom Parker, told me when I hopefully checked with them about a new crop of Hollywood rumors that Elvis would soon be embarking on a series of personal appearance tours. So the writer of this article, Derek, says that he's heard some rumors that Elvis is going to be doing some personal appearances. And of course, he doesn't say that part of that rumor is that he's going to go to Australia, but Derek's writing for an Australian magazine, even though he's in Hollywood. He's getting paid from an Australian magazine, so he wants to know if one of those tours is going to be to Australia. And here's what Colonel Tom Parker told him. Colonel Parker said, "We still continue to get many tempting offers for Elvis to visit your Australia and other countries. But Elvis's schedule of 3 movies a year, plus his recording sessions, take up most of his time, and he cannot think of taking on anything else for the present." Colonel says that Elvis is not going to be able to go to Australia because he's too busy, booked up. That he's doing things here in America by inference of being booked up, that he's making more money at than he could possibly make in Australia, no matter what these offers are. Much of it because of the time involved. So we can see that the article is revealing complex business decisions, personal commitments, and the management strategy that Tom has for Elvis, which is to maximize the time, of course, and so if they're traveling internationally, well, that's a lot more time than even traveling around the United States. And that's going to suck away time that you could be making money. And that's part of what's preventing Elvis from touring internationally at this point in time. Parker's management strategy is that as a former carnival promoter, he's applied the principles of scarcity and mystique to Elvis's career by limiting personal appearance. Colonel Parker has enhanced Elvis's reputation as an unattainable legend, a strategy that prolonged his star status, but it kept the international fans from seeing him perform live. Because he's mostly staying in Hollywood at this point in time. And then even when they do return to the stage, they first tour the United States. And it's so lucrative that they never leave, that they just stay in the United States forever, until Elvis passes away. And Colonel Parker goes on, and he says, for the time being, how can he interrupt Elvis's schedule? Even the American economy would suffer if he did that. Elvis now pays the U.S. government 91 cents out of every dollar he makes, It would be unpatriotic for us to drop below that figure. Neither the government or I would be happy about it. So this is a patriotic duty. Elvis has taxes to pay, and he's paying a staggering amount of taxes. He's keeping the United States solvent almost by himself with his 91 cents out of every dollar that he makes, according to Colonel Parker. And that Colonel Parker would not be happy, not to mention the government, if Elvis dropped below the 91% bracket. And Colonel wouldn't be happy with it because it would mean Elvis would be making a lot less money. Government wouldn't be happy about it because they'd be collecting a lot less money. And Keith is saying that the Colonel didn't have a passport. I didn't think EP wanted to address this issue. Keith, I think that whole thing about the passport is a giant red herring. I'll tell you what Colonel did have. He had a personal friendship with Lyndon B. Johnson, the President of the United States of America, and had been to Lyndon B. Johnson's ranch in Texas. Now, do you think that Secret Service would let a man who's some kind of illegal immigrant into the presence of the President of the United States of America? Now, how did Colonel get the Colonel title in the first place? Well, it was from two different governors of two different states that he'd done favors for. So they did not consider him to be an illegal immigrant either. So the whole passport thing is just a craziness that is thrown out there by people like Alana Nash to create something to sell books about. And Linda's asking, did Elvis know that he didn't have a passport? I don't think Elvis cared. I think Elvis thought that if they were going to go international, that Colonel would work it out and he'd get that passport. I don't think that was part of what Elvis was worried about with the Colonel. And Linda's saying Elvis was so kind, he said he wanted to tour internationally. He said that a lot, yes. But like with some of the other, like the dreams that we're looking at on the Circle G, he wanted to build a mansion. Then he got advice, and he determined he wasn't going to build that mansion. Now, it chafed at him, but he determined the best course of action was not to do it. I think that the touring internationally could be very similar. And Keith's asking, I wonder how the Colonel did his taxes. Well, according to the Colonel, the way that Elvis did his taxes was he just gave all the receipts to the IRS, and the IRS figured it out. Now, they also famously say that he didn't take any deductions, that Elvis didn't take any deductions. Well, no, Elvis didn't personally take any deductions because the IRS would have figured all that in. I mean, the IRS wasn't going to rip Elvis off. He's already at the 91% percentile level. So they would have given him the deductions that he was due. And if you've ever dealt with the IRS, like I've sent in some tax returns that they said, hey, you figured this wrong. We owe you an extra $2,000. So they're not out there to rip off people from their money or to keep them from getting deductions. But that's how the Colonel said Elvis did it. Now, how did the Colonel do it? I don't know. But I'm sure he did file taxes because there was so much talk about taxes. Well, certainly he was on the IRS's, in their line of sight. And this isn't even to mention that J. Edgar Hoover was after Elvis from like day one and really disliked Elvis and wanted to get rid of him. And J. Edgar Hoover is the guy who ran the FBI during this period. J. Edgar Hoover was so powerful. There's a lot of thought that he was controlling most of the government during these periods, that even JFK couldn't dislodge this man from power. So if he had felt there was something wrong with the Colonel, well, they would have taken care of that as well. And he says that the Memphis Mafia threw that story out there a lot too. Yeah, it's sensational, right? Couldn't have gone. He couldn't have done it. Why did the Colonel have to go? He wouldn't have had to go. And and Marion's saying they read it in A. Nash's. So it's not only in Nash's book. It was in previous books. It's been in books after. She's repeating a story, but she ramped it up with some speculation that had already been published in a Dutch book. So not like Alana did it all on her own, but others have followed suit, and there's just there's a need to create a villain out of the Colonel. But as you can see from what we're going through, that's not involving the Colonel, just on the Circle G. There's a whole lot of complexity to Elvis and the things that are going on around him and what people are saying. And that while one person says, well, I was telling him this, there's another guy saying, well, I was there and I listened to that person and I don't think that's what they said. And they're not as clear about it in these stories as saying that clearly. But when we start to line some of these things up, you realize that not everybody's perspective can be 100% accurate. And Marion's saying that she agrees with what I say. Thank you, Marion. I appreciate that. And Jules, Linda has muted me out. Linda, I'm just kidding. I can see that she's found the mute button and turned it back on. And Colonel said EP couldn't tour because of the pills and the guns. I don't know that the Colonel said that outright, but the Colonel was certainly aware that Elvis had habits that weren't going to be internationally welcome. And so it reminds me of Willie Nelson. I feel like somebody on Willie Nelson's staff told him at some point that some of these places we go are not weed friendly. And Willie didn't listen all that well. And he got busted for weed in a bunch of places. Which maybe he should have been doing it, maybe he shouldn't have. You know, that's all for a different kind of discussion, but Willie didn't listen, and Willie got busted. So, luckily, Elvis listened, and he didn't take his guns and his pills to other countries, because I'm afraid they would have loved to bust Elvis, and because the authorities were not necessarily Elvis friends. I think it would have created an international incident. Can you imagine that too? Especially if it was after Elvis had met with Nixon in 1970. That here's a personal friend of one of the presidents of the United States. He's getting busted for whatever, even if it was just for guns. I think a lot of Americans would have understood guns. They've been okay with that, but still. And Jewel says that, or Linda says it was Jewel that has reached down and turned me off. And Gunn's asking, other superstars could travel, but why not Elvis? So, Gunn, I think that other superstars travel now. But if you look at the time period that we're talking about, those superstars were traveling from Britain to the United States. Groups like Led Zeppelin and the Beatles, because there were not large enough forums where they were at to make the kind of money they wanted to. That money was available in the United States, where we were putting up these massive new stadiums. But as far as the pills and the guns and the other superstars could travel, well, it's more lenient to travel into the United States. But because these people were from these other countries to start with, they're not carrying any guns for the most part, so they're not taking any guns around. And the drugs, the pills, the smart ones would have other people travel on commercial airliners with their pills, and they would join up, or they just had contacts wherever they would go and they would get what they needed. And a lot of them weren't doing pills, they were doing street drugs, so those were available pretty much wherever they went. People would bring them to them at the concerts just to get access and stuff. So for the foreign superstars to travel, I think it was easier because they were already not into this gun culture to start with, and they wouldn't necessarily have been doing all the pills. Now, again, that's all speculation on my part. Don't really know. Keith's thanking me. Thank you, Keith, for coming and listening to all the work. Trying to put it all together so we can have the best view of Elvis that we can, of the man that was Elvis and not the image or the myth. And sometimes pieces of the man, they're not as presentable as maybe Elvis would have liked them to be. But if we don't understand everything about him, then how can we understand what the struggles were that he was going through, or why he was resorting to some of these pieces, these strategies in the first place? Like, if you're already having a great time, why do you need to take pills? Well, the pills enhance something for some period of time. But for some of the guys, they just took over. I don't think that was Elvis. I don't think he got to a point like Marty or like Alan Lamar or Alan and a couple of the others. They just went too far. And Linda's saying there's a story that Elvis almost got kicked off a plane going to D.C. to meet Nixon. He had a firearm. Well, he didn't almost get kicked off, and it's, again, it's a conflated story. There were multiple plane rides, and on one of the plane rides, which I can't remember if it was his first plane ride to Washington or the one out to L.A. I think it was the first one to Washington. He didn't have any money. And he gets to the desk at the airport, and he tells the women at the desk, he says, hey, I don't have any money. We'll put it on credit, and I don't have my cards or anything. So they had to call it a manager, and the manager's a man. And he says, well, I don't know, Mr. Presley. He's not sure what he can do. And Elvis starts to get a little perturbed, but he, is trying to do his special charisma. And one of those women tells the manager that he's going to make Elvis cry, and he better do what he needs to do for Elvis, or they're all going to walk out on him. So Elvis got his ticket, and he goes to get onto the plane, and as he's walking, in those days, or at least onto this plane, he had to go up the stairs from the tarmac like the president. We see him get on the plane now. It wasn't on one of those air ramps like we typically board a plane. So he's walking up the stairs, and as he gets onto the plane, a gun clatters out of his waistband. And he looks sheepishly around and says, self-protection. And the stewardesses are okay with it, but the pilot's standing there, and he looks at Elvis, and he tells him that it's okay, and he can go on back. So it's a slightly more involved story than that. And it's not the only time that Elvis did something like that with a gun. But probably more importantly, on one of the flights, he met a senator of the United States, and that man gave him the idea to go directly to Nixon. And that's how he got that idea. And then he wrote the letter while he was on the plane. And then he went to meet Nixon. So those are all wonderful stories, and we'll get to all of them one of these days. But for now, we've got to break again because we're at the hour. So I'm going to send you guys out with my newest song, which is about the Circle G. And it's called Threads and Dreams, and you all keep on taking care of business.
He wore a yellow shirt, black pants in the sun, rode horses through silence, then golf carts for fun. A ranch just 10 miles from the mansion's bright gate, where the myth met the morning and time learned away. George fixed the brickwork, the pipes in the ground, lit VP on shirt where no spotlight was found. Donna kept our of a father who labored, of a myth made by men. He didn't ask for gold, didn't dream of a crown, just a place to be still when the world spun around. In the hands of the choir, in the stitch of a scene, he carried the weight of a half-finished dream. The holster was worn, leather was cracked, BP etched in thread, no glory attached. Mike shaped the saddle, the belt and the load, so Elvis could ride through a myth he adored. He didn't ask for gold, didn't dream of a crown, just a place singing still, decoration spun out in the hang out the party. The mistakes on the seed, we drained the weight of the hearts and his teeth. Snowstorms in March to fairgrounds at night. He chased peace in motion and shadow and light. And Priscilla saw him silhouette aglow, breathing in twilight, steady and slow. He didn't ask for gold, didn't dream of a throne, just laughter at breakfast, a place to call home. In the hush of the ranch, in the hands of the crew, he found what was real, and he gave it to